with her. My mother obviously has done genealogy for many years. And when she lived in Madison, Wisconsin, her mother, my grandma, said, there's this fellow, he's a minister, he knows a lot about genealogy. Let's go see if he knows anything. Because our Norwegian family, all we knew about them was their last name was Wong, W-O-N-G. And this fellow, Pastor Naeseth, had gone back and forth between Norway and the US many times. He was very much an expert. He'd received a medal and recognition from the King of Norway on behalf of all of his efforts to foster Norwegian American ties. And so my mother and grandma, they call him and he says, oh, just come on over to my office. So they go to his house, they're in his office, and he pulls out a big book, all written in Norwegian, and puts it in front of my mom and my grandma and says, okay, you start looking there and I'll look some other places. And my mom and my grandma just looked at each other because they couldn't read Norwegian. They had no idea what this was. And less than 15 minutes later, Pastor Naeseth said, I found them. And he had found them. Their names were Nordvang, after the Nordvang farm, and it just got shortened in the US to Wong. And we have since been able to go and meet with our relatives. My mother has been over several times, and my mother has always maintained support for the Naeseth Library and the Genealogical Center ever since. It was just like the perfect magic. Dana Kelly serves as the executive director of the North American Genealogical Center. She oversees the daily operation of the center and is active in outreach activities and educational programming like this program. She is an avid genealogist herself, and her first experience with the center was as a member researching her own family 20 years ago. Dana's passion for family history led her to a Scandinavian Studies degree at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she learned to speak, read, and write Norwegian. She served on the board of directors of the Koshkonong Prairie Historical Society since 2009 and is a member of several Norwegian cultural and genealogical organizations, including Sons of Norway, Vesterheim, the Society for the Advancement of Scandinavian Study, Dane County Area Genealogical Society, and the International Society of Online Genetic Genealogists. So Dana, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Let me get my screen up here. Oof, am I sharing the right one?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. That's always my worst fear, that I'll put up the wrong thing and you'll be staring at my email or something. But yes, like Elizabeth said, I've been the executive director at NAGC since 2018. And I will have to say that when I got that degree in Scandinavian studies, everybody said, there's nobody out there who wants to hire a professional Norwegian. And every day I go to work and I chuckle at that, because that is exactly kind of how I feel like my life has turned out. I'm kind of a professional Norwegian. But we had a very lovely introduction here about what NAGC is. We are the most comprehensive library in North America that is dedicated exclusively to Norwegian American genealogy. And in 2020, we undertook some pretty extensive renovations. We added an elevator to our building. We improved all the lighting. We made our bathrooms ADA compliant. So if you're ever in Madison, please stop in and see us. We'd love to show you how everything is improved and how we've changed. And if you had seen us a few years ago, you won't recognize us. It looks very, very different. And this is our founder. He did start this collection in his home. He was just interested in Norwegian genealogy, and his collection spilled over into his office at the university, where he was the director of the libraries for the university library system. And eventually he decided to form a nonprofit organization. So he founded the Vesterheim Genealogy Center and affiliated it with Vesterheim in Decorah. And The collection, though, remained in Madison, and eventually in 1992, we did move into the building where we are today, and we have been there ever since. In 2007, we did have an amicable separation from Vesterheim because our missions really are different. Vesterheim collects artifacts and has a museum. We're a library, and we work exclusively with genealogy. So in 2007, we did become a completely independent organization, the Norwegian American Genealogical Center and Naeseth Library. Our collection contains over 10,000 items. We have over 1,800 Norwegian farm and local histories, which in Norwegian are known as bygdebøker. We have over 5,000 family histories published by people like you, people who have put together their genealogy and want to share it with other people who might be researching. We have a microfilm collection of the American Lutheran Church records. We have passenger lists, we have probate records, and we also have a large collection of other Norwegian American resources like church histories, community histories, college histories from areas that were heavily settled by Norwegian immigrants like Westby, Wisconsin, the Twin Cities, Decorah, Seattle, places like that, where there were a lot of Norwegian immigrants. And a lot of what we have on our shelves today still include Gerhard Naeseth's personal collection. Every once in a while, I'll open up a book and it has his name, written on the inside. We do publish a research guide. So if you are looking for a book that is a how-to specific to Norwegian genealogy, I would definitely recommend this one. We updated this just a few years ago. You can get this directly from us. You can get it from Amazon. We've got it out there for you. What Elizabeth mentioned, that she was able to go back and visit the farm where her ancestors came from. The best way to do that is by using a map. We carry this map series, which is basically these maps cover a very, very small geographic area of Norway. So you may need more than one to find where your family came from. But these maps actually have the farms on them by name, but include the modern highways. So you can drive right to them. They're very, very detailed. They cover a very small area. So like I said, you might need more than one. The first time I went to Norway, I took about a dozen of these so I could find what I was looking for. We also carry Christmas cards every year. This is the one we did for 2023, but so in 2024, we will have a new design. So that's something you could keep your eyes peeled for as we get a little closer to the holiday season. And every 2 years, we take a research trip to Salt Lake City. We'll be going this year in March. And this is not a trip that's just for people with Norwegian heritage. If you've never been to the research library in Salt Lake City, it is an absolutely fantastic library to visit. It is the largest genealogy library in the world. They have resources from every part of the globe. It's absolutely amazing what they have collected there. Anyone can get something out of visiting that library. They have volunteers and paid staff that are experts in all sorts of different areas of genealogical research. It is a fantastic place to visit. So I encourage you to think about visiting Salt Lake City sometime if you are serious about doing genealogical research. So besides having a library at NAGC, we also offer classes, and most of those are online, and most of those are genealogy how-to classes. We also offer translation services. If you have diaries or letters or things that are in your family that are written in Norwegian that you'd like to have translated into English, we have people on staff who can help you with that. We also have people on staff who can help do the research for you. If you kind of thing, genealogy just isn't your thing and you'd like to have somebody do the research for you, we can do that. If you've taken one of those DNA tests like 23andMe or MyHeritage or Ancestry, and you want someone to just tell you, hey, this is what it is telling you and this is what it's not telling you, I'd be happy to take a look at that for you. And then we also do things like this. So if you have a local library or a genealogical society, or you're a member of a bygdelag, or you have a family reunion coming up and you're looking for somebody to do a presentation, I'd be happy to do something like that for you. So this is a list of the classes that we have coming up. They're all starting in the next couple of weeks. The exact dates and the registration is all available on our website. So you can, if you're interested in taking any of our classes, you can sign up for those right on our website. Okay, that's the end of the commercial. I didn't get asked to come here so I could tell you all about NAGC. We're here to talk a little bit more about Norwegian genealogy. And there, in my mind, there really are three things that set Norwegian genealogy apart from the other ethnic groups in the world. And those things are their naming traditions, the influence of agriculture, and the fact that they have a state church. Those things kind of make Norway a little bit different than some other parts of the world. So the first thing I want to talk about is names. And this is probably the biggest point of tension and confusion when people come in to see us. They want to know why, when they're looking at their ancestors' names, they don't seem to be following any rules. And it's not that they're not following rules, they're just following completely different rules from what we are used to. Traditionally, Norwegians have had a three-part name, and the first part of their name is their first name, just like we have, and that is a name given to them at birth, and it's permanent. It stays with them from birth until death. So if we're looking at a little family here, just for simplicity, I've got a dad and a mom and a couple of kids, and they all have a first name that is very sex specific. That's something that we don't have in the United States. When you hear the name Dana, you might sit back and think, are we talking like Dana Delaney, or are we talking Dana Carvey? There aren't names like that in Norway. If someone is named Mikkel, you know they're male. There's no question about that one way or the other. They don't have names like Chris or Dana, where you might wonder whether or not that person is male or female. Now, the second part of their name is the patronymic, and that is also a permanent name that stays with them from birth until death. And what a patronymic is taking the father's first name and then adding son or daughter as a suffix to his name. So in our little family here again, if Mikkel's father is named Lars, his name is Mikkel Larsen. And his wife, if her father's name is Ole, she's going to be known as Sigrid Ol's daughter. And the children in the household are going to be Mikkel's daughter and Mikkel's son because their father's name is Mikkel. And you can see that everyone in this family has a different patronymic name. The children have a different patronymic because they're different sexes. One's a daughter and one's a son. And the parents have a different patronymic from their children because their fathers have different first names. So if you have two households living in the same neighborhood where the father is named Mikkel, their children are going to have similar, if not identical, patronymic names. So we have two little kids living in the same area with the last name Mikkelsen, but they're not brothers, and they may not even be related. They just have the same patronymic because their fathers happen to have the same first name. So having the same patronymic doesn't necessarily mean people are related at all. They might be, they could be brothers, they could be sisters, or they could just coincidentally have fathers that have the same first name. Then the third part of that Norwegian name is a farm name. And this is really more like an address because it changed every time somebody moved. This was not a permanent name necessarily. So if we go back to our family here and they're all living on the Vik farm, if the whole family is living on the Vik farm, they can use the name Vik as part of their name. The children are not using the name Vik because that's what their dad is doing. It has nothing to do with a family relationship. This is just because they all live in the same place. So they're all using Vik because they live on the same farm. If they pick up as a family and move next door to the Berg farm, they will all start using the name Berg instead of Vik because that's where they live now. If they're living on the Vik farm, but Lars moves away and gets a job over on the Berg farm next door, he will start using the name Berg because that's where he lives now. but the rest of his family will still use the name Vik because that's where they live. If this family gets a housekeeper and she moves in with them, she'll start using the name Vik. Even though she's not a member of this family, she'll start using that name because that's where she lives. So having the same farm name doesn't necessarily mean people are related either. It just means they live on the same farm. If these two families are living in two separate houses on the same farm, they're going to have very similar names, but that doesn't mean they're related. It just means they're living on the same farm. For now, if one of them moves away, they'll start using a different farm name. It really only indicates where they're living. So this is a screenshot of my great-great-grandfather in my family tree on ancestry.com. And you can see I've got everybody here has that first name, a patronymic name, and a farm name. And that farm name isn't necessarily passed from father to child. Sometimes the name changes with every generation. Sometimes it's passed from mother to child. Sometimes a husband and wife have the same name before they get married. It's because it really doesn't indicate anything about their family relationships. It just tells you where they are. It isn't necessarily a permanent name that goes with the family generation after generation. So when our ancestors got here to the United States, that was kind of a shock because people in this country had permanent last names. It didn't matter where they lived, their last names stayed the same throughout their lives. And husbands and wives had the same last name because they were married, not because they lived together, but because they were married. And children had their father's last name because they were his children, not because they lived together. So our ancestors had some decisions to make. Some families chose to use that patronymic name as an inherited family surname here in the United States. Other people chose a farm name, and that decision wasn't consistent necessarily within families. You might have brothers who chose different last names. You might have a father and
Hello,
son
everyone.
who
Today I want to
chose
introduce to you the
different
best
last
PDF reader
names.
for Android. This PDF reader is super versatile. It can quickly open
Somebody,
and
I think,
display
who's
files in
not
various
muted
formats.
here. So it's important to think about this naming custom as you're doing your genealogy because you might, at first glance, look at a couple of men and think, oh, they're not related. They have completely different last names. But they might be brothers. They might have the same mother and the same father. Having different last names doesn't necessarily mean that they're not family. And your family quite likely didn't have the same last name for several generations back in Norway. That might only be the case here in the United States. So it's important to remember that last names are not inherited the way that we are accustomed to here in the United States. And that farm name is kind of an interesting idea. That is not the way that a lot of cultures name their people. In a lot of cultures, like English speaking areas, you'll get occupation names like Baker or Cooper or Sawyer, something like that. Or you'll get descriptive names like long and short or black and white, stuff like that. Norwegian ancestors did not do that. They definitely used that farm name more so than anything else. Most of our ancestors immigrated between 1825 and 1924. There weren't very many people who came before that or after that. That was really the bulk of immigration to the United States. And the place they left behind was almost completely dependent on agriculture for their economy. In 1865, the Norwegian census identified that 75% of the people in Norway were living on a farm. So using a last name like farmer to differentiate yourself from your neighbors isn't really descriptive. 75% of the people would be choosing that as a last name. So they needed to get a little bit more descriptive than that in order to set themselves apart. So these farms in Norway were have had names for centuries. Some of these names even go back to the Middle Ages. They have been in use that long. It's been hundreds of years that they have been called what they are called today. One of the things I love about this map is you can see how different farms were in Norway from what they are in the United States. Here, our farms are squares and rectangles. But in Norway, that was not the case. The shape was very irregular. You can see how a lot of these farms are long and skinny so that everybody has access to the water. Totally different than the way that they're laid out here. And that naming tradition is totally different than it is here too. I have a farm. I live on a farm. I grew up on a dairy farm. When my grandparents bought that farm, they named it. In Norway, if my grandparents had bought a farm, the farm would have named them. It's a completely opposite way of thinking about those names. Now, like I said, those names are very, very old in Norway, but the spelling definitely has changed a little bit. When you see something from 400 years ago, it's probably not spelled the same way it is today, but the basic idea of that name has remained the same, even if the spelling has changed a little bit. But one thing about farm names, there are so many farms that have the same name. Names like Berg and Ness and Holton and Haugen, they're very, very common. There may be dozens of farms with the same name. And sometimes there'll be two farms even in the same church parish with the same name. So they aren't necessarily unique, but sometimes they are. Some of them there are only one or even two of a name, but in some cases there are dozens. So something to keep in mind. So I apologize for my horrifying art skills, but this oval here is representing a farm. Traditionally, the land was farmed by a family unit. And the oldest son had the right of first refusal when it came to farming the land after his parents. So younger sons, daughters, in a lot of cases, they were out of luck. They wouldn't necessarily get to have access to farmland. But throughout history, most of the farms in Norway have been divided so that multiple children would have access to farming and have that opportunity. And as the farm was divided, it would retain its root farm name. So in this case, we'll just use the example of a farm named Dahl. They would keep Dahl as part of the name generally, but the different divisions would get a descriptive term. So if it was divided in half north and south, the northern part would get called Nordahl and the southern half would get called Sordal. And same thing would happen with east and west. You might get Vestdal or Istdal for east and west. If some of it was on higher ground, it might get called Övredal or Upperdal. Some was on lower ground, it might be known as Nedredal. If there was an inner and an outer, you might get Yttredal and Indredal to describe the different geographic parts of the farm. Now, sometimes they didn't do that. They often did, but sometimes they would give these divisions completely unique names. So you might have a Dahl farm that's been broken up into pieces, but one of those pieces is just called Bakken. And then that division would be known as Bakken under Dahl. And it's under just like it is in English, UNDER. And that under signifies that Bakken is a piece of that Dahl farm. And obviously there's a limit, right, to how many times you can divide up a farm and still have it be a sustainable working farm that supports a family living there. So eventually we get to a point where there are just little husman's plus, what they were known as, just a house with a little bit of dirt around it for a garden on some of these farms. And those little cotters houses would get names as well. So sometimes they were descriptive, like the farm names. You might have, it might be known as Indredal, and that's just a little husman's plus. Sometimes they were given names like Bakken. So if your family is using a last name in this country that doesn't end with son, more than likely it is a farm name. And there's actually a pretty decent chance that that farm still exists. Some farms have been consumed by the cities as they've been growing, but a lot of farms are still there. So if you do your research well, there's a really good chance that you can go back to Norway and walk right back to that farm that your family left behind, the farm that gave your family its name. There is a really, really good chance that you'll be able to go and visit some of those places. A lot of other ethnic groups have to be satisfied with just knowing, well, this is where the church was where my great great grandma was baptized, and they'll never know exactly where she lived. We are so fortunate. We have a very real possibility of going right back to the exact place where our families lived. This is an actual example of a farm that's been divided up. This farm is called Vik. And you can see we've got these little black dots on here that are clusters of buildings. And kind of in the middle, they've got Øvre. And then you move a little bit to the right, and there's Midtvik. So that's in between the upper and lower. And then closer to the water, they have Nedrevik. And it is quite likely that a farm, when it's being divided, will be named like this. I also really like this illustration because it shows how these farms got chopped up over a relatively short period of time. 1750, this farm was only 4 pieces, and they were all decent size, big enough to sustain a family. But by 1900, it had been divided into 20 parts. So you can see why so many people left Norway from 1825 to 1925. It was getting to the point where farming was not a sustainable option for a lot of people. The other thing that I really like about this illustration is we can see that patronymic naming system at work. If we go over to the left-hand side, kind of near the bottom, we see we have Lars Knudsen, and then after him, we have Lars Larsen. And then after him, we have Odna Larsen. And then at the end in 1900, we have Lars Odnesen. That probably is not a farm leaving the family and changing hands to a different family. This is probably the same family going from father to son over generations. We can see how that last name changes. The history of these farms in Norway is so important that most communities in Norway have published what are known as bygdebøker. And a bygd is a rural community in Norway. And these books are really at the heart of our collection at NAGC. They are published by historians and genealogists, and they tell the history of this community. They talk about the churches, the post offices, the schools, the businesses. They include information about the wildlife and their fishing industry and all of that stuff. But most notably, they include extensive histories of each of the farms. And these farm histories almost always include information about the people who were living on that farm. They are just a vast treasure for genealogists. We have over 1,800 of these books at NAGC. We've probably got about 2/3 of them. It's hard to know exactly how many they are because they're still writing them. These are being published every year. So the number of books out there is growing, and we are trying furiously to fill in the gaps in our collection. We really want to have what you need when you come to see us to do your research. So this is a page that I just grabbed out of the Big Book from Ordal. And you can see on this page, we have a married couple, and then underneath them, a numbered list of all of their children. And it tells the names of their children, the years that their children were born. We get death dates in a lot of the cases. In some cases, it'll tell us when these children got married and who they married. It tells if they immigrated, what year they immigrated to the United States. There's just so much information here that you can use for genealogy. But just like the vegetables in the corner of the slide here, these books are not perfect. Much to everyone's frustration, including my own, not every community has a book. So I'm apologizing in advance if your ancestors came from Jevnaker or if they came from Gran. A big book has not been written for that area. For whatever reason, it's just no one has taken the time to finish writing a book for that area. And these books are only done for rural areas too. So if your ancestors have many, many generations of living in a city like Bergen or Trondheim, there is a chance that you won't find your family in a Bygde book. And these books are also written in a very wide variety of styles. Some of them are a 12-volume set. Some of them are only one book. Some have a lot more photographs than others do. Some have a lot more detail than others do. And then within the book, there are just oodles of different ways that the pages can be laid out in a different numbering systems. If you're struggling with trying to figure out how this book is organized, we can help you. We have gotten a lot of practice. We look at these every day. So if you're struggling to figure out how it's organized, let us help you. We can explain how this particular author has chosen to organize the book. Now, they are all written in the Norwegian language, but don't let that discourage you, because even though they're not written in English and very few of them have actually been translated into English, I've only seen 2 or 3 that have been translated into English. That doesn't mean they're inaccessible. Most of the information you're looking for are names, dates. Lars is spelled Lars, whether it is a book in Norwegian or a book in English. So I am fairly confident that you will still be able to use these books even if you don't read Norwegian. They are also not online, generally speaking. There are a handful that are available online. If you start Googling, you might get lucky and you might find one that is really helpful for your family. But in most cases, you're probably going to have to find a physical copy in order to be able to use one of these books. And they are, like I said, done by professional historians, professional genealogists. But we do find mistakes every now and then in these books. So it's important to not just accept that what is in this book is gospel, because there is a very real possibility that there are mistakes. Generally, the mistakes that we find are mistakes of omission. So maybe they will list 7 children for a couple, but they actually had 8, or they maybe will only list the first wife for somebody and not his second wife. But occasionally they are substantial errors, like giving the wrong wife to somebody or assigning children to the wrong parents. So it is important to double check and just make sure that what you're finding in these books is accurate. So how would you do that? Well, church records. I have excellent news about the Norwegian church records. The Norwegian Lutheran Church kept excellent records. They really did. The Lutheranism was introduced in Norway in 1537 during the Protestant Reformation. And in 1668, the Lutheran Church formally decided that they were going to keep parish records, but there were some pastors who were already doing it before 1668. Some of these really old records have survived. Now, we don't see records prior to the Reformation. Those no longer exist. But most parishes do have surviving Lutheran church records that date back to the early 1700s. And this is really what we use for genealogical research when we're doing Norwegian research. That the church kept fantastic records, and they have been very, very well preserved. The Norwegian Lutheran Church, because it is a state church, was part of the government. So it had an actual government function of recording what we would call vital statistics here in the United States. They were the official record-keeping body of the Norwegian people until about 10 years ago. So baptisms, marriages, confirmations, deaths, these were recorded by the pastor at the church level. And they even kept records of who was moving in and out of their congregation and who got vaccinated. They were absolutely amazing at keeping track of this kind of stuff. And they are just a magnificent treasure. They really are. I just grabbed a random baptism register from 1855. You can see what they have recorded here. We get a birth date for the child's name, the name of the parents, which farm the parents were living on. Usually the pastor would record that. He would record whether or not the parents were married. And we're very fortunate in Norway, there was not a huge social stigma about children born out of wedlock. So fathers usually claimed their children, even if they weren't married to the mother. So even if you run into an out of wedlock birth in your family, that isn't a dead end the way it is in a lot of cultures. You can still trace that baby's father's family because he is named in the baptism record and on that child's confirmation record and on that child's marriage record, more than likely. Fathers claim their children even if they weren't married to the mother. And we're very fortunate too that the majority of these records have survived. Since the Viking Age, Norway has lived in relative peace. And even during World War II, when Norway was occupied by the Nazis weren't going around burning churches. The only record loss that we see in Norway is the occasional, maybe one church had a flood, so some records were lost, or one church had a fire, so some records were lost for that church. But there wasn't widespread record loss throughout Norway. So most of the records are available and intact. So odds are your Norwegian family, at least part of it, can be traced through church records into the early 1700s, if not into the 1600s. That is entirely plausible. All of the church records, they're no longer kept at the church record or at the church level anymore. They've been transferred to various National Archive sites throughout the country, but they've all been microfilmed. And those that are old enough to be viewed by the public are available for free from the Norwegian Digital Archives website. This is a fantastic website. It is, like I said, it's free. I can't say that often enough. You do not have to pay a subscription to view records from the Norwegian Digital Archives. They are all there. I could spend, honestly, another 4 hours talking about what they have on this website. They have scanned images of baptism records, confirmation records, marriage records, burial records, everything you would expect from church records. But they also have census records. Every Norwegian census through 1920, that's the most recent one that has been released to the public. They're all there. They have immigration lists. They have court records like probate records. There are some land records on there. They have military records, all sorts of stuff that you can take a look at. It is a fantastic website, it really is, but it's not always easy to use. Unfortunately, most of the records have not been indexed. So what that means is you can't just go to the website, type in your ancestor's name, hit search, and then have a whole bunch of results come back. It's entirely possible that your ancestor's marriage record is there, but it hasn't been indexed. So doing a search like that will never find it. In a lot of cases, unfortunately, we have to say, okay, I suspect that my ancestor got married in 1860. I think they were living in Vardal. So let me go find the Vardal parish book, flip to the 1860 and just scan the page looking for your ancestor's record. So in order to use this website, you do have to kind of have a browsing mentality. You have to be willing to flip through a book, even though it's on a screen, to still have that kind of mentality. Like they say, things can be fast, good, and free. Pick two. The digital archives are good and they're free, but they aren't necessarily fast. So it can be a little bit frustrating to use because not everything is indexed. But for free, I don't know how much more I could ask for. It is a pretty amazing website. Now, there is an American website that has a lot of Norwegian records available on it, and this one is also free. If you've never explored Family Search, I encourage you to do that because, again, it's free. They have so much stuff here. It's an easy website to use. Every Norwegian record that they have is indexed, so it's very easy to use to get started. Now, they don't have everything that's available through the digital archives. It's not even close, but they really do have a lot, enough to get started for sure. They've got a lot of censuses. They have millions of baptisms and marriages. It's worth looking here because this website is easy to use, it's searchable. I always start here because their search function is easier to use than the digital archives. It's in English, so it's pretty user-friendly for an American to get started. And the other thing that I love that Family Search has that I wish Family Search would do a better job promoting this is their wiki. It's like Wikipedia, but it's just for genealogy. They have over 100,000 articles on here about everything under the sun. It's not just Norwegian genealogy. They have the world on here, little articles telling you the history of different places, different records kept by different religions. One of the things I love on here is their interactive calendar. A lot of times when we look at old Norwegian church records, it will say, oh, well, this baby was baptized the second Sunday of Advent in 1812. I have no idea when Advent started in 2023, much less when it started in 1812. So you can go to this interactive calendar, say second Sunday of Advent, and they'll give you the date for the second Sunday of Advent in any year you want to look up. So you can get the actual calendar date. They also have maps on there. They have pre-recorded webinars that are all free. So you can sit and listen on your own time to different topics, different with people talking about different genealogical topics and giving tips. A lot of great stuff on this Family Search Wiki. I use it a lot. Now, Ancestry is not free like Family Search is. This is a subscription site, but they also have a lot of Norwegian records too. They have everything Family Search has and then some. They have even more Norwegian records than Family Search does. Again, not as much as the digital archives, but they have a lot of good stuff on here. And if you already have a subscription to Ancestry, this is a great place to look. They do have a library edition. So if you don't have your own subscription, there's a really good chance your public library does. So you can go there and use this website for free as part of, the benefits of having a library card. I would never ever pay full price for Ancestry. It goes on sale all the time. So if you are thinking about getting a 6-month subscription, wait till it goes on sale. They put it on sale on Black Friday and Mother's Day and Father's Day, all sorts of occasions they will put things on sale. So I would wait, be watching for a sale. And if you're going to do it when it goes on sale. Ancestry is not the only subscription game in town. MyHeritage is a smaller site. They also have quite a few Norwegian records on it, not quite as many as Ancestry, but they do have quite a few. They also have a library edition similar to what Ancestry does, but it's not as common. I don't see this in as many public libraries as I do the Ancestry library edition. But one of the reasons I wanted to mention MyHeritage is that they attract a different audience than Ancestry. Ancestry definitely dominates the English-speaking world. Americans, Canadians, Australians, we flock to Ancestry. Europeans flock to MyHeritage. So if you were hoping to connect with a Norwegian cousin, someone who lives in Norway, who is researching your family and building a family tree online, they're a lot more likely to be on MyHeritage than they are on Ancestry. So that's something to think about. If what your goal is to locate people in Norway who are related to you and are interested in genealogy, this might be something to think about. MyHeritage definitely has more Norwegian users than Ancestry does. So DNA is an interesting tool, and I normally don't, historically, I have not said, you know what, everybody should just get out and take a DNA test because it's so easy and useful. Well, it isn't easy. DNA is one of those tools that's not intuitive to a lot of people. It can be really hard to use. But there are some reasons that as a Norwegian, it's worth thinking about. And one of those is those pesky naming traditions. When I look in my family tree, I have dozens upon dozens of men named Ole Olsen. There's just tons of them in there. So keeping straight which Ole Olsen is which. And when you go into the records, there was one time I was helping somebody and we were looking for a baptism record for his ancestor. And on one page in that parish register, 5 boys in a row named Canute were baptized by that pastor. 5 babies in a row had the same first name. It is very, very easy to get your ancestor mixed up with somebody else in Norway because the naming system lends itself to that. It makes it easy for us to confuse people. And sometimes the only way to know the difference between the right Ole Olsen and the wrong Ole Olsen is to do a DNA test. That sometimes we have recommended that to people. We'll say, we can't tell the difference. Maybe you should take a DNA test and we can see if we can sort this out. And another thought that I had about DNA tests too, that I read this recently and it really hit home. DNA is like memories. When somebody is gone, their memories and their stories go with them. The same thing happens with their DNA. So if you are lucky enough to have parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles, cousins from, your parents' generation who are still living, asking them for a DNA test while you still have the chance can be a really big deal. The last time I saw my great uncle was at the family reunion where I asked him for a DNA test. The last time I saw my great aunt was the day I went to visit her at the nursing home and ask her for a DNA test. Both of them died within months of me asking for that DNA sample. And even though they have been gone for years, I am still able to go back to those test results and use that information for my genealogical research. And had I not done that when I had the chance, just like their stories and memories, it would just be gone. So I was fortunate that I asked them for that, even though I wasn't necessarily ready to use it. So it's something to think about. If you can capture that information while you still have the chance, even if you're not ready to use it, even if you're not sure how you would use it, having it for the future it's something to think about. So if I've enticed you at all to look into your heritage and look into your ancestry, this is our website. This is our email address and our phone number. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd love to stop in and see us, we would love to see you and show you our collection and show you hopefully show you some things that you'd be able to use when you're working on your genealogical research. So did anyone have any questions? I know that's a lot of information.
It's like Lake Miosa.
Oh, I heard somebody say Lake Miosa. That is where I'm sitting. Hi. Good eye. I'm always blocking the church, but that is the Nest Church where my husband and I both have ancestors from this area. So I'm actually on the island, Helgoya, in the lake where I took this picture. So that's where I'm sitting. Very good eye.
Would your slides be available to the lodge?
Oh, sure. I can do that. I can email those to Elizabeth. Write that down.
Hand it to me. Hi, I'm driving my son to skating. So I'm just going to say thank you so very much. Are there other questions that anybody has? Thank you for joining us, Dana. I really appreciate that. And I'm definitely going to be watching that recording again because you gave so much interesting information.
Well, thank you.
Dana, I've
Yes.
got something.
Sure.
I had always thought that the digital archives were only in Norwegian, but I recently found out that they have an English menu option.
They
now.
do.
Okay.
Yes. Now, the records themselves have not been translated at all. So, you'll pull up the baptism record. The headings are all going to be in Norwegian. They have not translated that, but our research guide does have all of the parish headings translated in it, and so does the Family Search Wiki. They have all of the census headings and all of the parish headings translated on their website also. So yes, the menu, you can toggle between Norwegian and English, but the records themselves have not been translated.
Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome.
I just want to say that this has been a fabulous presentation, and I want to thank not only you, Dana Kelly, but the people at Oskalodden for inviting the rest of us who are suffering through the cold weather to join in. It's been wonderful.
Well, thank you for joining us. How cold is it where you are?
Oh, I haven't checked. It's not as cold as it is in Wisconsin, but we get used to slightly warmer temperatures here. And we've been very lucky this fall and early winter.
Yeah, we haven't had cold either until just now. Today, I just looked at my phone. It's 2 below right here in Madison right now. And we didn't get winter until last week. All of a sudden it got cold and we got a foot of snow. We had a very mild winter up until just last week. We were, kind of spoiled, got kind of lucky. We should not expect to go through winter without snow and cold temperatures. That's kind of foolhardy.
And I'm in Iowa. As you might guess, Karen Erlindson's my daughter. We have about 4 below and 18 inches of snow on the ground
Okay.
on the level. And then it's drifted, of course.
You're right, right. My poor dog, my daughter has a corgi, so her legs, are this long. She goes outside and all you can see is her head. There's so much snow out there.
I had a question about kind of ongoing record keeping.
Sure.
So is Lutheranism still a state religion in Norway? And also, I mean, obviously Norway is a more diverse place in terms of people's participation in any form of religion and or different religions. So how are they keeping track? Is it just via census, or, what happened to that record keeping function?
Sure. So yes, Norway still supports the Lutheran Church as a state church. So they still do have the state church. The church is still part of the government, but the Norwegian people have become more and more secular over time. But what's interesting about that is you're poking through the church records in the digital archives, especially in the cities, they will have dissenter records, and that is for the people who aren't Lutheran. So maybe they are Quaker or Jewish or Methodist or Catholic, they're not Lutherans, but they are still reporting, they were still required to report their children's births to the Lutheran Church, even though they weren't Lutheran. And there are civil marriage records also on the digital archives. So again, those are mostly in cities. But so if you can't find a marriage record for your ancestor, it might be because they were dissenters. So they weren't members of the Lutheran Church. They got married in a civil marriage instead. And the civil marriages actually sometimes have more information than the Lutheran records because it explains when they left the church sometimes and why they left the church. So you get a little bit more insight into the kind of people that they were. But because of the secularization of the Norwegian people, and they don't go to church the way that most Americans do. So then it was 2012, I believe, was when they finally said, okay, we're just going to have now a separate department that's not affiliated with the church, that keeps track of births and deaths and those kind of things. The church can still keep burial and baptism records, but the actual birth and death part of it, this is now a civil function, not a religious function. But in our minds, church and state are never the same thing. But in Norway, that's not the case. The church is just part of the government. It is the state. So it's just a different way we have to remember that the church is part of the government. And I had somebody ask me a couple months ago when I was doing some sort of talk about the census. They said, well, who took the census? Did they send a census taker around? And I said, no, you got to remember, the church is the government. So the pastor did the census. So in 1865, he was writing down everybody in the community. And there is actually a great benefit to that, because if they were just sending out a government census taker, there's a really good chance people in remote parts of Norway would never have gotten recorded. The pastor knew who belonged in his church. So the odds of him missing somebody are a lot lower. Certainly are people missed, of course. There's no way every single living soul was recorded in that census, but it's a lot better than the United States census taking because it was somebody local who knew the people recording that information. We have any other questions?
Hei, tusen takk for alt du fortalte oss. Men det er én ting som jeg tror ikke Jeg vil ikke at du skal Oh, I'm speaking Norwegian, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything you taught us. And I really believe that genealogical research is so important. And the only thing I wanted to say is that you can go quite far back. You know, don't tell them they can just go a little bit. They can go back.
yes.
Yeah, once you get
very-
going, I'm serious, because people, they will help you. And the books and the information is there. My mom traced us back to the Vikings, and it's not nonsense. So I know it's possible.
Yeah, Norwegian records are very, very good.
They are.
They really are. We're
Yeah.
very, very lucky.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
Oh, Vashagu. And I did understand you. I was afraid that I had oversold my Norwegian skills, but I did understand what you said when you started talking. I thought, well, she is brave. Somebody asked about my sweater. I'll stand up a little bit so you can see it. It's the Norwegian flag. My husband got it for me for Christmas, and he bought it at a store in Stoughton, Wisconsin. So I don't know if it's sold online or not. It's not a Dalla. It is made like from some Peruvian sweater company. So it's made of like alpaca. It's not wool, but yeah, I thought it was kind of cool. We have any other questions?
I'll just comment that Astrid is absolutely right that you can get back very far in history with these things. A second cousin of my father's in Norway traced us back to the 1200s. Now, not all the branches, of course, but I do know who one of my 22nd great grandfathers, I think it is, what his name was and where he lived. And actually, I've seen the farm that he lived on. And I have some other information here that I haven't even gotten through, and that apparently takes us back even further.
It's very, very fascinating.
I'm wondering if how much of what you said would be applicable to Danish heritage.
Well, the Danes also have a digital archives website. I have done a little bit of Danish research because my husband has some Danish ancestry.
Mhm.
The church records look virtually identical to Norwegian records, because Denmark controlled Norway for several hundred years. So the Danish influence on the written language in Norway is pretty strong. And the headings look almost identical in Denmark as they do in Norway. But the Danish site is also free. And off the top of my head, I can't think of what it is. It's like Archiv Digital. That might be the Swedish one. But it's a similar website where the church records and the military records and things are all scanned and available online for free. Denmark also had a similar patronymic naming system and a similar farm name system that Norway had. Denmark did go to permanent last names before Norway did. I don't know how much sooner, but they did transition into the permanent inherited family surname a little earlier than Norway did. But I'm not positive when that happened, but I do know it was a little bit earlier. I haven't really done much with like the Danish census. I don't know a lot about Danish records. I've only played with it a little bit, but it was the first time I looked at them, I was surprised at how similar they are to Norwegian records. And then after I thought about it, I said, well, duh. This is, similar government, similar culture. Of course they're going to be similar. So a lot of it does apply to Denmark and Sweden as well. A lot of the customs were the same. I see
I'm
Holly
parked
has
now,
her
and I
hand up.
see Holly's hand up.
Yes, Holly.
Hi. Thank you again so much for this information. I had been working with our dear Roger Drong, who was our lodge's, I guess you'd say unofficial, but wonderful genealogist for many years. We lost him in October of 2019.
Oh,
But
wow.
so much of what you've shared today, and it was just, good to see it coming so clearly from another source. But one thing, I was able, with Roger's help, to trace my great-grandfather's immigration from the Rude farm near south of Lillehammer, and was able to visit there. And but since that time, finding new information or more detailed information, I was hampered by looking for the town that was nearest there. It kind of consists of, I don't know, it might be a hardware store, maybe it might have been a post office or a grocery store, which is where I stopped and asked for directions. When I was there, I asked for the name of the farm. And then they went, oh, well, they found somebody else, it was all the customer service desk, that farm doesn't exist under that name anymore, but because it's been carved up. But there was somebody there that knew where the mother farm was and gave me exact directions to go down the street this way till you get to the house that's got the trampoline in the yard, and then you turn left and it's going to turn into a dirt road, 2-track, but keep following that. It comes to a Y, hang a right, and I went to the very farm where he was born and raised. And it was but finding that in hard copy has been a challenge until this very moment, because instead of looking for the town of Mo, which really isn't really a town, it might have been a farm at one time, but it's been turned into a small business district now. I looked for Root, the farm name, and bingo, there it is. And the location south of Lillehammer is exactly where it's supposed to be. And it's awesome. I can do a satellite view. I can do a map view. I can do a street view. It was just like, and I could never find those before because I was looking for the town instead of the farm name. It hadn't occurred to me.
Yeah, you can go on Google Maps and look for a farm name. And in a lot of cases, it will take you right to it.
Well, I just Googled it, and that's what took me there. And it's got a little funny green grassy like plant symbol. And so I don't know what search format actually found it, because it doesn't say Google Maps. But I don't care. I'll take it. What's the thought to look for the farm name versus the municipality government area of that area before you said that? And bingo, there it was. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, in Norway, they really do recognize farm names. They really do. If you are, I was contacted by someone from Norway, and I didn't realize. I was like, well, my ancestors came from that area too. And he said, well, what farm? And so I told him, he knew exactly where it was. He's like, oh, of course. Yeah, everybody knows that farm. They know where that is. And it's just a part of their culture to know all these farms and where they are. You drive past them every day, and that's how that area is known. And we don't have a tendency to think like that. We think like an address, and they think more in terms of the names of these farms.
The young man that lived on the same farm that my great-grandfather did, that he immigrated with, they went together, they were similar age, And the other young man, Morris, he took the farm's name, so his last name became Rude when he got to the United States. But my great grandfather kept his father's name, first name. So and
Sure.
yes, he was Ole Olson. And my grandfather's name was Ole Olson, because his father had been Ole, so but he became Ole Olson. But and that's the one thing, funniest thing that all my brothers and sisters remember about my grandfather is his telling us that with laughter that he was the original Ole Olson.
Yep, there was only one.
Dana,
Yes.
I'd like to thank you so much, along with Elizabeth and Judy and the other people that have said thank you, for the great presentation and all the answers to questions. I wonder if any of us wanted to visit you in Madison. What's the best procedure? Like contact you by email or phone, and then can you set up an appointment, or can you kind of review that again as far as your
Sure.
access?
Yeah, we're open, Monday through Friday. We are also open the second Saturday of the month. We do suggest that you don't have to have an appointment. It's not required. Walk-ins are welcome, but we do suggest contacting us, especially if you're coming quite a distance like most of you would be, because we do have classes sometimes or other large groups that are coming. And we are in downtown Madison. If you've ever been to downtown Madison, you know that parking is extremely limited. So if there is a large group coming, there may not be a place for you to put your car when you get to us. So we do suggest calling ahead and just making sure that there will be enough parking spaces for you when you come to visit us. We do have our own parking lot. It's off the street and it's free, which is also huge in downtown Madison. You don't see that very often, but we want that to be for our visitors, and we certainly want that to be available to you. So we do suggest just checking ahead to make sure that there's not a large group coming, so that you'll have a more rewarding experience when you come to see us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions before we end here today? It's been a wonderful program.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, we're really happy to see all of you who checked in to view the program today. I think it's about 1 degree here in rural Keeler, west of Kalamazoo, where I live, and we had a lot of snow overnight, and now it's cold and blowing and drifting. But my Norwegian grandkids are all outside except for the 2-year-old who's supposed to be taking a nap, but I know she's in there jabbering away. So we're enjoying the winter here, and much like you are up in Wisconsin. We're gonna. Does anyone have any announcements or anything they want to share with the group at all before we just go to the Askeladden business meeting?
I would like to say something because it might interest people in Lansing. The Michigan Nordic Fire Festival was noted in the latest edition of the Viking magazine. And so this is something that Gail and I went to last year, and we both really enjoyed it. And our lodge has been a sponsor of it for almost the entirety of its existence. So I just thought I'd point that out.
Thanks.
I should say the festival takes place at the Eaton County Fairgrounds in Charlotte, however you pronounce that.
Charlotte. So when is it?
It is always the last weekend of February.
Oh, okay. Yep. And the Birkebeiner the National Ski for Light is in, where is it? Racine?
Rhinelander.
Rhinelander. I knew it was R. I got the wrong city. It's in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, not out in Colorado or Wyoming or wherever this year. And that's coming up soon too. Anybody else have any announcements? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you again to Dana and Elizabeth for securing her for a program. If the Askeladden people would stay online, we'll proceed to our business meeting. And the rest of you have a good snowy afternoon. Keep warm and safe on the roads if you're out at all. And we'll hope to connect with you again soon. So while we're waiting for the, while we're waiting for the non-Askeladden members to log out here, just want to say hello to all the Askeladden members, Kurt, and welcome to everybody. Does anybody have a guest right now? I know Karn's father was on at some point, right, from Iowa, and
Has signed off.
yeah, but he did speak up at some point.
Yeah.
A little while ago. Yeah, so that was great that he joined us. Does anybody else have any other guests? Let's see who we got.
Do you want
Elizabeth-
to stop the recording, Gail?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
what I was going to say.
Right,
Thanks.
right. Yeah, thank you for